What if you understood that prosperity was a function of value creation? Well, that dispels the notion of money being evil or wrong, and instead just being a byproduct of the best you have to bring to the world.
Welcome to the Men's Midlife Revolution Online Summit. I'm your host, Tim Corcoran, and today my guest is Garrett Gunderson.
What's going on, Tim?
Hey, man. Good to see you. So Garrett tackles the critically important topics of financial growth, success, and prosperity that are all too often neglected, mostly due to painfully boring presenters in the field. He's the founder of an Inc. 500 firm and author of multiple Wall Street Journal best-selling books, as well as the hit New York Times bestseller, Killing Sacred Cows. Garrett is a regular on ABC's Good Money. He's been interviewed by Neil Cavuto on Fox, was kicked off CNBC, which would be a great story to hear.
Yeah.
Has been featured in over 1,000 radio interviews, guest on hundreds of podcasts, and is also a paid contributor for Forbes. Beyond this, he's spoken at MIT multiple times. As they say, if you want to transform your thoughts into profits, keep way more of what you make, keep and grow your money without sacrifice or delay, Garrett is your guy. So welcome here, Garrett. It's great to have you here on the summit.
Well, you did a great job with that bio, man. First off, some people call it, like when they're reading, they read too quickly and they call it Killing Scared Crows, which just sounds atrociously mean. I don't know, it has to do with anything.
Right.
So you nailed that. And yeah, the CNBC thing was actually on a Christmas Eve. I was on the program, and they said it was actually December of 2008. So you can, imagine it's right in the midst of we're in the early parts of this recession. And I say,
Sure.
What are some good investments to get into? And I go, well, definitely not the stock market. I would cash out if you're in that right now. And they cut to commercial, and everything went dead, and I never heard back from them. So
wow. Yeah. Okay, right there.
Yeah. And then one of my buddies who used to work on Wall Street, he was working out in New York watching CNBC, calls me. He's like, dude, did you see that guy's face? I'm like, no, man, I'm looking into a camera. I'm just in a feed. Right. He goes, his eyes were so big, and then he's like, it was awkward, and they just cut to commercial. I was like, they should have known what they were getting with me, man. I'm not going to hold anything back.
Right, exactly. Well, that's awesome. So listen, before we dive in, I really want to speak to our summit audience right now and let them know why it was so important to me to have you on this summit, right? For me, having a healthy, thriving relationship with money and finances is something that didn't come easy to me, right? Like growing up, like many, money wasn't spoken about much in my household. And by the time I was a young man, I had a lot of unconscious financial habits in place. So I got by for a while, right? But as happens, about 10 years ago, it all pretty much came to a crash for me, right? When I found myself maxed out in credit card debt, despite directing an otherwise thriving visionary business and organization, my wilderness school. So that was the point for me, Garrett, when it all changed. When I realized, okay, I have got to take a look inside. I've got to take a look at what's my relationship with money. What are my habits? What are my beliefs that are holding me back from really thriving? And, if I want to live this life fully, if I want to fully express my purpose, I've got to have a solid relationship with money and finances. So that's where I stand now, much better place financially than I was 10 years ago, gratefully. And your advice, even if it was just online and articles and whatnot, has actually been really supportive in my path. And so that's what I want for our audience, right? I want them to have that healthy, thriving relationship with finances, with money, to clear whatever limiting beliefs they've got going on, really that they can step into real prosperity.
A lot of those limiting beliefs are subconscious. They come from, well-intentioned family, friends, preachers, and teachers. They're the conversations we overhear. They're situations that we watch. I think of like when I was a kid waking up, we were camping once, and I woke up and my family, my parents were outside, and there was a little plaque on the trailer that said, "Money's the root of all evil," with a little devil. And I remember looking at that, being kind of scared. I remember sitting down under the table once, just with my blanket as a little kid, and my mom's crying at the table. And I'm like, "What's going on?" And she's like, "Oh, we're insurance poor. All of our money goes to insurance companies." I'm like, those SOBs, right? Like those kind of moments when you see real emotion for people that you care about, that kind of gets programmed, whether it's accurate or inaccurate. And I feel like to a large degree, we're kind of tribal beings. And so what does it say if we confront that? If we change our own belief about that? Like I've heard my grandma say, oh yeah, he made a bunch of money because he's just a bad person. I remember that on a drive once, pointing something out. And so these little things can kind of slip in. And so fortunately, I've just been inquisitive enough and curious enough. And I also just saw the footprints that were left in my family from my great grandfather leaving his wife for 7 years to build a life where they could afford a home and bringing her over from Italy. And then that trapping of scarcity that got imprinted throughout the family. It was all about sacrificing and scrimping and delaying and deferring, and that everything about money was complicated or risky, and that they just didn't have the courage to confront it and just have to hold on to it. And like I just fortunately asked enough questions, got in the right relationships, and I'm helping change that from a generational standpoint, not only in my family, but really out there in the world, because scarcity is the greatest destroyer of wealth. No amount of luck or saving or discipline or rate of return or financial advisor can save someone if they're in scarcity, because fear, doubt, and worry start to lie. They're thieves of joy. They move us further away from value creation. They tend to create that selfishness that actually, it like kind of moves wealth away. And so like the good news is what we think is complicated about money, a lot of times we don't even need to know. And that there's a lot of people that tell us it takes money to make money because they want our money, or that high risk equals high return because you're taking risk while they get the return. And so if we can cut to the bottom line and say, what are simple things that once you understand can help you to have a better life? What if you understood that prosperity was a function of value creation? Well, that dispels the notion of money being evil or wrong, and instead just being a byproduct of the best you have to bring to the world. And I strongly believe that all the problems that we face in the world, we actually have the resources and human beings to solve those problems. But because of the confusion around money, because of the lack of understanding of principles of prosperity, that the world never sees that, and therefore these problems are exacerbated.
Yeah, and I love that point that you're saying that money and financial wealth and prosperity is an expression of value creation, right? For me, as a purpose coach, a purpose guide, someone who helps individuals connect with their purpose, oftentimes what I see, and I know I had this for a while, is that same belief. Money is the root of all evil. It's greedy, it's horrible, it's going to ruin me, it's going to ruin you. And yet that's a huge one right there, right? I mean, that's huge.
Right. And like, I think where money becomes problematic, and it becomes, instead of an ally and an asset, it becomes kind of an enemy, is when people try to hoard it, when people look to have it regardless of what they're creating, or when they feel entitled to it. And so unfortunately, kind of the notion that's came about for people is that money is a function of three factors. Number one, how much can you get, right? Number two, how much can you earn on that money by taking unnecessary risk? And number three, can you wait extraordinary amounts of time for that to one day, someday pay off? And unfortunately, they lose the momentum along the way, and they're being taught a set of rules that the institutions aren't following. Like the institutions aren't waiting for 30 years for a retirement plan to fund. Instead, they're creating cash flow today. And so I would say, instead of trying to accumulate or wait for 30 years, what if instead it was about, I'll say it this way, it's so simple. Instead of looking at living within your means as a way of cutting back and eliminating and reducing, because no one shrinks their way to wealth, what if we looked at two other factors? One is being more efficient, which means plugging the leaks, which means keeping more of what you make because you're not tipping the government, because you're not overpaying on insurance costs that aren't providing benefit, or you don't have hidden fees or commissions that are creating drag on your investments that don't provide a rate of return, or overpaying on interest because you don't have the right structure to your loans or methodologies to lower interest rates or structure those things in a way that benefits you versus the institution. So like, we could be more efficient within our means, and then that boosts the bottom line. And I think that that's by 10% or more without having to coupon clip or cut out. And then finally, another piece is to expand our means. Expanding your means means delivering more value, impacting more people, more deeply impacting the people you currently serve. And in doing that, dollars are a byproduct of that value creation, or dollars follow value. So You can expand your means, be more efficient within your means, or you can get stuck in a budgetary reductionist mindset, which is all about elimination, which once again will not lead to sustainable, enjoyable wealth. Yes, you might be able to become the millionaire next door, but you'll be broke and miserable trying to get there. And unfortunately, if you have kids, they'll probably just waste the money after you die within 16 months because it was never understood, never talked about. And so there are better methods, and they are simple. It doesn't mean that you have to know about tax liens or options trading. It doesn't mean you have to be an expert in real estate or the stock market. What you do have to recognize is you are your greatest asset, not some stock, bond, or piece of real estate. And if you can understand that and invest in yourself and find ways to build foundational pieces to protect and transfer risk, and then increase your ability to make money, then learn how to keep more of the money that you make without cutting back, and eventually become a better investor that focuses more on cash flow than accumulation, you will win the game. You will absolutely win the game.
Beautiful, beautiful. I mean, so many important points in there. So let's start with wealth and prosperity. I'd love to hear, Garrett, your definitions. How do you define wealth? How do you define prosperity?
All right, so I'm going to give 4 definitions here.
Yeah.
I'm going to give a definition of wealth, prosperity, financial freedom, and economic independence, because having a distinction of these 4 things, I think, can be instrumental.
Great.
So I think there's a difference between being rich and being wealthy. Being rich means you have a lot of money. That's being rich. And there's people that have a lot of money and they're corrupt a-holes, and there's people that have a lot of money and they're pretty happy. It's an ingredient. It's not the recipe. So being wealthy comes down to 5 tracks. There's 5 tracks to wealth, and this isn't about balance. It's about depth and harmony. Depth means presence. It means intentionality. Harmony means you're designing it in a way that you're orchestrating and being the author of it rather than it happening to you. So that would be my definition. So the 5 tracks of wealth are finance. So, money is an important part of society unless you're going to permanently live in the wilderness with a loincloth and a bow and arrow. And then fine, money's probably not that important at that point.
Sure.
The second thing is purpose. Like when people don't have purpose, they tend to be miserable. They tend to be sad. They tend to be misguided, right? So purpose is essential to wealth. And the third piece is mindset. Our mentality is essential wealth, because you could have all the money in the world, but if you have scarcity, you're never going to feel wealthy. Right. The next piece is health, right? Or our physical well-being. Someone without their health would probably give all their money just to have that health back, right? And then finally, social. So the social aspect of wealth is relaxation, rejuvenation, and recreation. If all you do is work and have no hobbies, if all you do is work yourself where you get diminishing returns and you're exhausted and you lose relationships, it's not really wealth. So we have finance, purpose, mindset, health, and then we have the social aspect. Those are the 5 tracks of wealth. And it's being intentional about it. And it doesn't mean you're perfectly balanced. It just means that you have that presence and that you know what you're doing. Okay, now with prosperity.
Beautiful.
Okay, so prosperity, I have an equation for prosperity, okay? And this equation is we take our perspective, okay, our perspective, which is how we view the world, and then we add our purpose. So what our perspective comes from abundance, which is governed by innovation, ingenuity, and inspiration, versus scarcity, which is governed by fear, doubt, and worry. So we take that perspective, then we combine purpose, which narrows it down to say, what is it that we're up to, right? And then we multiply that by production. Production is an action that we take based upon that perspective and that purpose to bring it into the reality of the world. That's what prosperity comes from. Yeah. So, right? So that's a definition of prosperity. Now, financial freedom. Financial freedom is something that's been abused and bastardized in the world because there's no amount of money you can have an account and have financial freedom. Financial freedom is a mindset. It's a perspective. And it's one where money's no longer the primary reason or excuse why you do or don't do something. I'll say that again. It's where money's not the primary reason or excuse why you would do or not do something. It's a consideration, just not the consideration. So if I were to boil that down, let's break it down into 3 parts. In measuring worth, there's the price, there's the cost, and there's the value. Price is what we pay. Cost is the economic impact, and value is the overall feeling of satisfaction and joy we have. So people that are not financially free focus on price and they overemphasize it. They maybe look to do whatever they can to lower the price, to have savings, to coupon clip, to budget, to scrimp, to save, right? Cost looks at the economics behind it.
Mhm.
So I can have something that is low price, high cost. Like if I were able to get on an airplane for $1 because they decided they didn't want to worry about maintenance or training their pilots, sure, the price is low, but I'm going to be dead at the first sign of turbulence, right? So it's low price, high cost. On the other hand, I have an amazing accounting team. They're higher priced than most people, but the cost is lower because of the amount of tax that I save and the peace of mind that I have.
Mhm.
Now, value, I just recently took my family to Italy. And when I say my family, it's actually my parents and my siblings, not my wife and kids.
Yeah.
And on the flight home, we were flying home on New Year's Eve. I wanted to be able to have energy to stay up till New Year's, and we're going back to see our spouses and everything. And so I got us first class. Right now, first class was more expensive, but you know what? It was my dad's favorite trip that he's ever taken was just first class because it's lay down seats. They're bringing in ice cream cart. There's every movie you could ever imagine. He just felt like a king for 10 hours flying back from Amsterdam. And so, like, yeah, the value was so high that it outweighed the cost and the price.
Yep.
It just did. But for other people, that might not be valuable. Other people might say, I don't even care. I wouldn't want to travel. I don't, that's not even my thing. But if we begin with value first as the first consideration, cost is the second consideration, and price is the third, that's from a financially free mind. That's what a financially free mind does. Now, economic independence is when we have enough cash flow coming in from one of two sources: assets that kick off recurring revenue, or entrepreneurial income, which is the income that comes in even if you're not working that day. So that comes from scale or leverage or automation, right? You still have to monitor it, you're still managing it, but not moment to moment. And when we have cash flow coming from that to cover our basic expenses in life, that's economic independence. Financial freedom is a state of mind. Economic independence is a state of assets producing cash flow. When you're economically independent, you get to have more freedom and choice day to day because you're not forced to pay the bills due to your daily actions. So now we have the definition of wealth, 5 tracks. We have the definition of prosperity with perspective and purpose combined with production. And then we have the definition of financial freedom, where money is no longer the primary reason or excuse we do or don't do something. And then economic independence, enough cash flow to cover our basic expenses. Just having that definitionally allows us to have different targets, different understanding. Therefore, we have an awareness that can create different actions. And with those different actions, you get better results because we don't have to wait 30 years for economic independence. We can have that within 3 to 10 years simply by having the right methodologies and frameworks.